You're listening to New Talk on WNSR New School Radio.
April 20th marks the first anniversary of the passing of civil rights legend Dr. Dorothy Height. She died at the age of 98. Dr. Height was an icon throughout the civil rights movement, known for her steadfast commitment not only to civil rights, but to women's rights as well. She served as the president of the National Council of Negro Women, an organization dedicated to the advancement of African American women and their families. Throughout her career, she was awarded a number of high honors: the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Bill Clinton in 1994, the Congressional Gold Medal by President George W. Bush in 2004, and was an honored guest at the presidential inauguration of President Barack Obama in 2009. Former U.S. Secretary of Labor Alexis Herman said of Height, "She was a dynamic woman with a resilient spirit who was a role model for women and men of all faiths, races, and perspectives. For her, it wasn't about the many years of her life, but what she did with them." Dr. Height was often quoted as saying, "If the times aren't ripe, you have to ripen the times." And ripen the times she did. From being one of the few women to speak at the Million Man March to organizing rallies of her own, Dr. Height was always there. After being denied admission to Barnard College because they only admitted 2 blacks per term, she received an honorary diploma from the university. And whatever she did, Dr. Height was not so much concerned with getting public recognition, but for fighting for the causes that advanced freedom and fairness. She will be sorely missed. Joining me today is Dr. Elsie Scott, the CEO of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, to discuss the life and legacy of Dr. Height. Dr. Scott was named CEO in 2007. Prior to joining CBCF, Dr. Scott served as Deputy Commissioner for Training for the New York City Police Department and Executive Director of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. Dr. Scott lives in Washington, D.C., and serves on the Senior Steward Board at Metropolitan AME Church. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Scott.
Thank you for having me.
Can you give me your thoughts on the life and legacy of Dr. Dorothy Height?
Well, what can you say? She was a giant of a woman. I guess the most giant of a woman in my lifetime, in that she had the opportunity to influence the civil rights movement, the women's movement, and just was so engaged with so many things in history. As a result of having been able to live till she reached 98, as well as the fact that she was, I'd say, at the right place in a lot of events in history. You know, when you think about things like the March on Washington, engagement with A. Philip Randolph around some of the union issues, working with Mary McLeod Bethune on education issues, and then just living long enough where a whole new generation of women could and men could be exposed to her.
From what I understand, you had the opportunity to meet her a few times. How was she like in person?
She was a very humble person. I had the chance to work with her quite a bit over the last 3 years of her life, in my position here as president of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And we have a group called the Black Women's Roundtable, where we meet over in her building. And she would come into our meetings because she was one of the founders of the Black Women's Roundtable. And so we used to meet on Thursdays, and she would come into our meetings many times and would just sit there quietly, and you'd almost think that she was asleep. But when we would get too far off base, she would chime in and sort of give us a lesson as the senior person in the room as to what we were doing wrong, or trying to help us to figure out how we should strategize. I remember we were getting ready for a meeting over at the White House, and everybody had something to say. Everybody thought we should do it one way or the other. And she sat there, and she listened to everybody. And then when we all had something to say, then she spoke to us and just gave us her wisdom, as having met with presidents, a number of different presidents, that she knew what needs to be said. She knew how to say it, how to get a president's attention. So I just enjoyed her wisdom, but I also enjoyed the fact that she was not a showboat, that she was willing to sit back and allow other people to get some of the limelight. And so I think in the end she got her limelight. You know, you look back at the March on Washington. You don't think about the fact that there was a woman engaged there because she was sort of in the background, but she was one of the architects of the March on Washington. But she lived long enough where all the rest of them, or most of the rest of the leaders there, are now dead, and so then she was able to be recognized by a whole new generation because she was still around, and she had not sought to get the limelight, but she ended up getting the limelight because people later in life, more people were able to recognize her and her contributions, perhaps more so than when she was younger, when it was more of a male-centric civil rights movement, and she lived long enough where now women were integrated into the civil rights movement and into all of the struggles that women were now being recognized. So she lived long enough where she could get recognized for all the things she had done.
Now, you and I are actually connected through Dr. Dorothy Height. If you remember when she had passed, I was on my way to Washington, D.C. to attend the funeral. I did not have a ticket to attend the funeral, and I didn't know necessarily how I was going to get to Washington, D.C. from New York. And I was emailing everyone that I can think of and calling different offices. And I emailed you, and you responded and gave me information about the funeral. Probably not something that you would have expected someone of my age to be interested in. But what do you think of the significance of Dr. Height, particularly amongst young people my age? I'm 23 years old, and the influence that she had on future generations.
I was just so pleased that a young man would write me who wanted to come and honor Dr. Height, because I think many of us have worked with Dr. Height in the context of what she has done around the women's movement. And so we recognize that young women recognize the value and appreciate the value she brought to this society. But we often don't think of young men your age even knowing who she was unless you lived here in Washington. And then to feel so honored to have been to have had her here fighting for you, that you would get up before day in the morning and take a bus down to Washington to stand in line not knowing whether you would get into the funeral. That really touched me. And I appreciate some of the postings you did, afterwards, just sharing your experience with other young people. So I was pleased that after she died, I heard from so many young people who work here at the foundation, and other young people who felt like they had been touched by her, that they appreciate the fact what she had done for racial equality and gender equality in this country. So I'm very pleased that she impacted your generation.
Yeah, to a broader context, when you talk about preserving history, I understand that the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation is putting together, or has put together, something called the A Voice Project. Can you talk about that and what you're trying to do to preserve history?
Okay, the A Voice Project is capturing the history of African Americans in the legislative process in the United States. And what we've been able to do with financial contributions from Dell Incorporated and with support from the University of Texas at Austin and Howard University, we have created an online virtual library. And now we have, I think it's 7 exhibits on different topics. But what we're able to do is to take a topic like the making of the Martin Luther King holiday bill, and we're able to reach out to Congressman Conyers, who originally introduced the bill and who fought for 13 years to get it passed. And so we are able to reach out to him to get in original documents that he might have those things digitized and placed online. We're able to get pictures and, all the congressional records and a copy of the bill. And so what is happening, you have people from throughout the world who did not know anything about the Congressional Black Caucus, who did not know how they have been engaged with history in the United States. Now they're able to go online to the Voice site, www.avoiceonline.org, and they can read about the accomplishments. In addition to the Congressional Black Caucus, we also have information there on all of the African Americans who served in Congress during Reconstruction era. And because a lot of people don't know anything about that, and they don't realize that we had black senators and black Congress members during Reconstruction. So each year we try to put up another exhibit to try to expand the knowledge around the history of African Americans in the legislative process. This year, I think we'll be doing an exhibit on the CBC and the criminal justice system. Last year, the exhibit we rolled out was on education. Each exhibit is dynamic. And so as we get additional documents, as more members of the CBC donate their papers to libraries to the point that we can get access to their original papers to get them digitized and to place them online, then we will continue to expand the project.
Okay, in closing, I just want to ask one more question about the legacy of Dr. Height. What do you think her lasting legacy is going to be?
Probably around black women's issues. The reason why I say that because she kept the National Council of Negro Women going after Mary McLeod Bethune died. And so a lot of her legacy probably will be preserved through that organization. But I think history will record her engagement in the civil rights movement as well as the fight for the equality of women, and especially of African American women.
Okay, that concludes the interview. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
You're listening to WNSR New School Radio.